Hi, I'm Tom on a Budget and welcome to this two-part video about my experiences of shipping my motorcycle out of Australia. In this part one, I'll go through the general procedures of getting your motorbike and to some extent car moved by either sea or air freight. With part two, we'll focus then on available routes between Australia and Asia. So what exactly are we going to be talking about? We will focus on the all-important Carnet de Passage and a few useful hints about it, flying your motorcycle via air cargo, shipping via LCL or FCL, and I'll touch a bit on the process of bringing a motorcycle or vehicle into Australia. And an important disclaimer first, I am not a professional, so take whatever I'm saying with a grain of salt. I'm just a guy on the internet talking about his experience and what he found himself on the internet. If, like me, you're from Australia, then no matter where you want to go, this is a huge island and a bit of a hurdle to overcome is the ocean. So, unless your bike is also a boat or it can fly, you will need to rely on freight people to get your vehicle onto dry land that is not Australia. Now, before your motorcycle can even start crossing the ocean, the ladies and gentlemen from customs will want to have a word with you. To the best of my knowledge, Australia is the only country that requires you to have this antiquated and expensive document on you to leave the country. What is the Carnet de Passage? It's essentially just a guarantee that you will bring back your vehicle into the country where it is registered. It's a pretty big document and a bit of a pain to transport and quite expensive as well, which is why it's starting to fall out of favor and less countries do require it. However, if you look at this map, you can still see there's still quite a few countries that do need you to have one. How do you get it? It depends now heavily on the country where your vehicle is registered. If your country has got an authority that's authorized by the FIA to issue a carnet, then you've got no other option. You have to go to your country and get one there. If your vehicle is registered in a country that does not issue a carnet, then you're in luck and you can start shopping around a little bit. It just purely depends on the value of your vehicle, and to my knowledge, you have to shop around. Two countries stand out for it. If you've got a very expensive vehicle, then the Australian AAA is your best bet because they just simply charge you a flat fee of 1,100 Australian dollars and another $500 for a deposit. And if you've got a cheap vehicle, then the Germans might be your best choice with the ADAC or Allgemeiner Deutscher Automobilclub, charging you around 525 euros depending on whether you're a member or not. Have a look online, it might actually be cheaper if you are in the area, plus another up to 90 euros for shipping. How to get the carnet? Well, you just follow the steps on the website, but there's a bit of nuance to some items like the vehicle's value. And here's something good to get even if you don't need the carnet, and that's an evaluation from a dealership. In Australia, you need to get one that's with a letterhead from the dealer. So you might ask what kind of value you should put on. The common recommendation is as low of a reasonable value as possible. The reason being is that some countries will still charge you their own duties and bond based on the vehicle's value. A notable example here would be India, which requires you to pay a 55% bond on the value of your vehicle. So if you now have a brand new R1300 GS that's worth $35,000, make sure that you've got another $20,000 ready to hand out as a deposit. In my case, I've got a 10-year-old high-miler Honda Wave 125i, or a member of the Super Cup super cheap urban bike family, which is not even sold in Australia. So when I went to the dealer, he just point-blank looked at me and asked me, can you please tell me how much you want to put on this letter, because as far as I'm concerned, it's worthless. So we settled on $250, which should be quite reasonable. The next item you have to then put on is the value of your tools and spare parts. In my case, I'm not carrying any parts, just buying them locally as I need to, plus another $5 for beaten up spanners and $20 for tools, just so I have something on there. I'll briefly touch on some of the nuances of the carnet as well. Firstly, the use, it's pretty straightforward actually. Once you have used it, it's got a page for each country you visit where you fill in the entry and then again the exit. And that's all supposed to be done by the customs officer. A more tricky question is the bond, how that works. And in Australia at least, it works the following way. You pay your bond and you only get it back when the vehicle returns back into Australia or into the country of registration. The question that I only got answered by actually talking with somebody on the phone, it's not documented anywhere, is the extension and the bond. So if you extend your carnet within 12 months before it expires, then you just pay another $1,100 and you get a 12 months extension. However, if your carnet has lapsed, that means you have to apply for a completely new one, which means paying another bond. However, I've been promised that you will get both bonds paid back again if you return the vehicle back to its home country. The next item of bureaucracy then would be the International Driving Permit, or IDP. It is required by a lot of countries for a lot of licenses from other countries, so unfortunately you might need it. And just like the Carnet, it's an antiquated old paper document that you now need to watch out for that it doesn't get wet, and it's way larger than it needs to be. And it also lasts for only 12 months, so good luck getting another one along the way. I'll report on how it goes for me. With the bureaucrats now happy, we can now start looking at actually using transport to get off the island. So let's start by sea. Here we've got 3 options. The first one would be to put your bike onto your own boat, sail it to the location you want to start from, and then make the boat go away. Yeah, that's not the option for most of us. So you will have to hire someone else to do that for you. And that someone will most likely want to have some assurance that your vehicle or whatever you're asking them to transport is not going to cause any harm. And now it doesn't matter if it's a car or motorbike, it will be equipped with a 12-volt battery that is filled with nasty chemicals and has got electricity coming out of it. That electricity can now create shorts and sparks, which in turn can start fires, which get much worse if you add fuel to the mix, which makes your vehicle a dangerous good. This will now have implications with packing and will differ between air and sea freight. I'll get into those in the respective segments. Going back to boats, unless you ship a very short distances where you have got the option of roll-on, roll-off ferries, or you're a manufacturer, you will be confined to container ships, and they carry containers in the sizes of 20 foot and 40 foot and a few odd sizes in between. And these container ships are huge. They're measured in TEU, or 20-foot equivalent unit. That means how many 20-foot equivalent containers they can carry. And some of these can carry over 10,000. Which makes you a flea on a giant's back, especially with the amount of regulations that surround the shipping industry. Which is where freight forwarders come in. They consolidate the freight of multiple people into containers and in theory should make the whole process smoother for everybody. They will sort out your paperwork of customs, and they can also help you find a method that will suit you to get your vehicle into the destination you want to ship it into. As a general rule of thumb, the area of responsibility for the freight forwarder you're dealing with ends at the destination port or airport. At which point another freight forwarder will normally take over. You can either search for your own one, or the freight forwarder you're dealing with can suggest you one. But beware that this also means additional costs. If you're dealing with sea freight, these costs could be as high as the shipment costs into the destination port. With the freight forwarders now done, we can now start looking at the 2 different types of shipping by sea, and these are LCL and FCL. If you're only shipping 1 motorcycle, maximum 2, then your best option will be LCL, which stands for less than container load. Here the freight forwarder will take a container and cram as much stuff in there as possible, and they will charge everybody who's putting their stuff in there by the amount of space they take up. Here the most likely charge will be in the dimensional or dim weight of the crate with bike combined. That's where they will take the volume in square centimeters of the crate's dimensions and divide that by 5,000. That is then put in kilograms, and they will charge you by which one is heavier, the dimensional weight or the actual weight, and unless your bike is made out of lead, then normally the dim weight is heavier. Here you can save some money by shrinking the dimensions through a couple of easy things like removing the windscreen, your top box, some of the luggage, the mirrors and the front wheel. You can add some additional cost savings with crating. So if you're in a country like Australia where labor is really expensive and you're handy and you've got maybe access to a workshop, then you could save some money by doing the crating yourself. A good source of crates are motorcycle dealerships, as they usually receive their motorbikes in steel crates that they then dismantle after the motorbike is taken out, and the crates don't go anywhere but to a scrap dealer. So if you visit your local dealership and talk nicely with them, they might take you to the back of the store and they'll let you pick and choose which crate you want for free. Going back to the basics of LCL, there is a potential for things to take longer doing it this way. I'll talk about it more in part 2 when I'll be talking about the Darwin to Dili route. If crating sounds like a pain, or if you have got a lot of stuff that you want to ship, like multiple motorbikes or a car, then FCL, meaning full container load, might be the option for you. This means that you hire the whole container and you load it up however you want it to be loaded up. Logic dictates that a whole container is more expensive than part of a container, but it's actually not as expensive as you'd think it is. So if you know more than 2 people to join in, once you're 3 bikes in, it actually might be cheaper to just go with the full container. With one major advantage being that you don't have to disassemble anything. You just roll your bike in, it gets strapped down and hopefully arrives without damage on the other side. However, since things are packed a little bit more loosely, there's an increased risk of things moving around and or damage to your stuff. So you'll want to go with somebody who you can trust that they will pack it nicely. Apart from the damage risk, as far as shipping by sea goes, this is the best way of doing that. If you plan ahead on Facebook or social media, you can find others quite easily to share a container with you. A good starting point would be the Horizons Unlimited group, maybe Ride ADV and some local overlanding groups. And Horizons Unlimited is how I found the group to share a container with from Australia to Malaysia. That group consisted of a Toyota Land Cruiser troop carrier with 2 other motorcycles. The freight forwarders on both sides will still have to deal with the costs of the vehicles individually because of customs, but in our instance that was a lot cheaper for everyone at the end. How much, you might ask? Well, in our case it cost me just about 1,350 Australian dollars to ship my bike to Malaysia, and again 1,230 Australian dollars with the freight forwarder charging us in Malaysia. A little caveat I might add are the changes in freight rates, as they get renegotiated at least once a year. So if you get a quote in December, expect prices to go up in the new year. Which was the case for our group as well, especially with the Malaysian side, where the costs almost doubled there. And those weren't the increases from the freight forwarder, those are the port authorities in Malaysia. And I've only recently found out that apparently Malaysia at this time right now has got a lot of congestion in the ports. I wonder if they try to reduce the amount of shipments going through their port. Going back to the topic of packing and dangerous goods, but on boats, the standard procedure here is to have your fuel tank drained to reserve or 1 liter, depending on who you're dealing with and how big your tank is. Very importantly, the battery will need to be disconnected at least from one terminal, and that terminal to be taped up. A topic I want to briefly touch on, but I would love to get feedback from some people who know more. Leave a comment, and guys, have a look in the comments as well, because often people leave some very valuable information in here. And that is shipping insurance. Full disclaimer, I have a deep distrust for insurances, especially in the recent years, because it always feels like they're trying to scam you, because they're the referee who decides on whether or not your claim is valid. Where they will usually weasel themselves out of a payout because of some technicalities, like getting flood insurance and then not getting a payout because water came in from the roof and not from the river next door. And with that rant almost over, it is recommended to have shipping insurance if you're shipping by sea. Where again, if your vehicle isn't worth that much, it can depend on who you go with. It can feel like a total rip-off. In my case, the insurance was $325 from Brisbane to Malaysia with a $1,000 excess for an insured value of $2,500. Meaning that unless something really significantly broke, or if I get a total loss, I would get no more than $1,500, which implies a loss rate of 1 in 5. So I'm wondering what's going on here. The normal thought being that it only covers your belongings, i.e. if a container falls off the ship or something terrible happens inside of the container, which is really rare for individual containers, as very rarely do all containers on a ship get lost. I've been trying to find some statistics, but I can't find any, but one worry here is called general average. It's a method to distribute damages across all participants that have cargo on a ship if there is substantial damage either to the ship or to a whole bunch of containers on it. A recent example here is the Maersk Frankfurt, where some containers have caught fire. Here the owners of the ship have declared general average. When that happens, all parties involved with the ship will be required to pay their fair share towards the damages. That share depends purely on the value of their stake in that operation to average out the damage incurred across all parties involved. In the case of the Maersk Frankfurt or the MV Dali, most containers on the ships were actually fine. Now, if you put yourselves into that situation, if you had belongings on there that have been destroyed, then you don't have to pay anything anymore. You have lost your stuff. But if you're one of the people who has a container where everything is okay, then your container or your contents will be held hostage until you pay. We know that ships are slow, which is why the days of the ocean liner are numbered. Planes are so much more convenient. In theory, a voyage from anywhere in Australia to Asia should be no more than a few weeks. The problem we run into are delays beyond just the normal ship's schedule or voyage. Those delays can come from bad weather, but holy moly, these are the post-COVID years. Things have been going on. Like the Houthis blocking access to the Bab el-Mandeb, and if you've been watching What's Going On with Shipping, this is the time when you take a drink. For those who don't know, it's an area in the Red Sea that connects the Suez Canal, and for the last few months, because of the attacks on shipping, container ships with high-value items have started to avoid the area and are now doing an extra 2-week round trip around the coast of Africa to go from Asia to Europe. Add to that port congestion in Malaysia, and you're looking at a time frame of up to 3 months to ship something from Bangkok or from Malaysia into Europe. So if waiting isn't a thing for you, or you're trying to get your motorcycle into a country that is landlocked, then air freight might be your solution. And if you've been hanging around the forums quite a lot, you might have even heard that it's often cheaper than shipping by sea, which sounds very counterproductive because the charges for putting anything onto a plane are usually very, very high. But the whole process outside of the actual transportation is a lot more straightforward, so much so that you pay a fraction of what you would pay for customs clearance and getting a vehicle out of a seaport at the target destination. There's far less with an airport, which brings all of those costs a lot closer together. But it all depends on the countries you're dealing with costs usually being cheaper in places where airfares are usually a lot cheaper as well. A thing I want to mention on here is freight forwarders. You used to be able to contact airlines directly, I've been told by some travelers in the past, and organize shipping of your motorbike through those. However, in my experience, that's no longer true, especially in Australia. As soon as you contact an airline, they'll just tell you a bunch of freight forwarders that only deal with businesses. And even in Thailand, when I tried to fly my motorbike out, I had to go through freight forwarder. AirAsia in particular, they don't want to have anything to do with motorbikes. Which leads me back to dangerous goods, which are stricter on a plane for obvious reasons. Here it will depend heavily on the carrier that you're dealing with and the freight forwarder as to what they require you to do. In my case, when I was flying my motorbike from Bangkok into Kazakhstan, it was almost the same process as if I was shipping it, except that the tank had to be fully drained. If you're dealing with more sensitive carriers, like you find them often in Australia, then oftentimes the shipper or freight forwarder will require a purchase certificate, which can go as far as even requiring the fuel lines to be drained. Another issue I've read with some people in the past is that of gas shock absorbers, where technically they're considered pressurized vessels, which means that they need to be depressurized before they're legal to be put on a plane, and then you have to find somebody who can recharge them to the correct pressure with fresh nitrogen gas at the target destination, which is something you find online if you search for it, but luckily I haven't heard too many reports about this being an issue today anymore. A bigger issue will be the battery, especially if you've upgraded to lithium-ion. If you have, declare it, but most likely it is beyond the maximum capacity that you can put on a passenger or a cargo plane. And you absolutely do not want to find out about the plane your bike was on the news. But even with traditional lead-acid batteries, there can still be some issues. At minimum, you might be required to provide an SDS or safety data sheet to your freight forwarder so they can verify that the battery is good to fly. However, if you're not allowed to, maybe not all is lost. If you're in a cheap country, you might be able to just buy a brand new battery, and a lot of modern Yuasa batteries, they come as a 2-pack, where the battery itself is completely dry and the electrolyte fluid, or many call it acid, is in a separate canule that you then put into the battery when you want to activate it. I welcome you to read the safety data sheets from Yuasa yourself. It's quite interesting stuff. The last part I want to talk about is getting a vehicle into Australia. Here we'll have to deal with the Australian Quarantine and Inspection Service. And that's actually one piece of bureaucracy I don't complain about, because I love Australia's wildlife, and unfortunately it is very, very sensitive to any invasive species. Without going into details, I welcome you to read up on the damage caused by the cane toad or by the very innocent sounding fruit fly in Australia, which are animals, which sounds logical, but there's much more sinister stuff which you wouldn't even think about, like fungal pathogens that can stick to tires and to shoes and then from there get into the soil of a new area and then destroy entire hillsides with very, very rare and unique plants. I have seen these kind of places where you see plants just all shriveled up and like looking a bit sickly. So this is why they're very, very strict with quarantine. So how do you get in then? It is possible. I've done it with my Wave, but you have to be very, very thorough. With a motorbike, what I would recommend is, and what I have done with my Wave is, I have taken off all of the fairings. So in your case, take off as many as makes sense, and then get a pressure washer and then just pressure wash through all of these areas, and then of course dry them off as soon as possible again, so you don't have any corrosion happening afterwards. They will look in there, trust me. If you're unlucky, they will have a good sniff inside of your vehicle. One place or two places, because they're very similar, that they will definitely look into are the radiator or the air conditioning condenser in a car. So definitely make sure that there's nothing stuck in those. Which brings me to the end of this video. In part 2, I'll be trying to talk about some different routes to get out of Australia into Asia. Maybe I'll do something about Europe as well. I'll make this up as I go. And since you've stuck out all the way to the end, I'd like to say thank you so very much. And if you'd like to support the channel some more, I would highly appreciate a subscription as I'm trying to reach monetization status, and a thumbs up would go a long way as well. And until the next time, I hope you have a great time.